Alright guys, what's up? So today I'm going to be making a virus with you guys, and this is going to be a remote access administration tool virus or a botnet virus. It's going to be really customizable. This is actually the purpose of this tutorial. It's more of like an educational tutorial instead of like do this step by step. Although I will be going through this step by step, but the goal is more of like education and for you to be able to customize this for yourself. But we're gonna just go ahead and make a project. You go ahead and name this whatever. This is not gonna be the actual virus right now, so you can name this like something fancy. You can name this whatever the name of your virus is, because this, you give this a fancy name. This right here is what you're gonna be running on your computer, so it's gonna be safe and it's gonna be like the host. So it's going to be the server, so you can give it a fancy name, but I'm just going to keep it simple, call it virus. Let that create. And I'm just going to go ahead and, I'm not doing anything that important here, I'm just changing this to the way I like it. And I'll just go ahead and in the main right here, I'm just going to write welcome to your control panel. So yeah, just so that we know this is the server. And just on the end here, I'm just going to put constant read key just so it doesn't exit out on us. So this is pretty straightforward. I'll give this a little run. And I press the key, it's gone. And I'm going to right click on my solution up here. I'm going to add a new project. I'm going to add a console application. Now this one, I'm going to call it the client. This, you don't want to give it a fancy name. You can call it client, you can call it something along those lines. It really doesn't matter, but you're not really going to be seeing the name that much with the application. This right here is the actual virus you're going to be infecting people with. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. It's up here. And I'm just going to format this to how I like it. Namespace is client.cs. That's weird. But anyway. Oh, whoops. I named it client.cs out of habit, but I hope it's not like that in the Explorer. Okay, I just named that client.cs for some reason, but I fixed it. Oops. Anyway. So we're going to go to the client, the program.cs. And in here, this is basically what we're going to do today is make a connection. So what we're going to do here is say public void, and we're going to go ahead and listen. And basically what we're going to be doing in this function here, we're going to be listening for packets from, well, any IP address on a specific port. And this is how we're going to send commands to whoever we infected with the virus. This is how we're going to send commands to their computer so that we can access their computer. And it's going to be customizable, but in this tutorial we'll be having a few commands and you'll be able to make your own. So what we're going to do is just I forgot to make this a static void right here. We're just going to put listen right here. And actually, we're going to import this using system.threading.task. And we're going to go ahead and put this in a new task. So we're going to say task t equals task.factory.start new listen. And when we're saying listen, we're referring to this function right here. And basically what I've gone ahead and done here, I've made a new task, and if you're not familiar with tasks, it's basically a thread. And if I were to write some code here, this code right here, no matter what it is, this is just for example, is going to be running simultaneously with whatever the task is, and in this case the task is to run this. And the reason I've done this is because we're going to be wanting to listen to packets all the time, because we want them, even for instance, if we send the command to do some work, whatever kind of work it is, but then we decide we want to cancel that work and stop it, we're not going to be able to until that work is done, unless we run it simultaneously so we can listen to commands while the work is being done. And that's why we have it right there. It's in a new thread. And I'm going to go ahead and add some new imports here. System.net, system.net.sockets. I think I'm going to need system.text. And basically these three imports, these three imports and system.io, just for the streams function of that, are kind of like the general three imports that you're gonna want, because for like doing connections, because obviously system.net and system.net.sockets, that's kind of how you do the connections. And then system.text, whenever you're sending sockets, you have to send bytes, and I'm actually going to show you guys that right now. And in the listen for commands, we're going to create a new IP endpoint from system.net, and we're just going to call it IPEP, because it's not that significant. And we're going to make a new IP endpoint. And in the constructor here, we have two parameters, and that's the IP address and the port. But right now, since we're just in listen here, we don't have anything that we need to do. So we're going to listen to IPv6 any. And a lot of mistakes that people make is that they say IP address.any, but let me try this first. This is that would only listen for IPv4 addresses, and an IPv4 address is in this format. For example, you're probably familiar with IPs in this format, but even my IP address is no longer in that format. Everyone's kind of converting to IPv6, which is kind of like in this format right here. I don't know how many numbers it is, but it's kind of in this format. And the way we're gonna be able to communicate with IP addresses in both these formats if we add compatibility for IPv6. So that's what we have to do. And if I just did IP address.any, it wouldn't have compatibility for IPv6. So that's one thing that we're going to take into consideration here. And for the port, we're just going to write 0, because it doesn't matter right now. We're going to eventually, well, in a few minutes, I'm going to make a socket with the actual ports. And we're just going to convert this to endpoints. And that's straightforward, because as an IP endpoint, it's a derivative of endpoint, obviously, so we can easily just convert it like that. The next thing we're going to do is create a byte array data, and I'm going to give it this length. First of all, the reason I gave it this length is because this is the maximum amount of data you can have in a packet. How many bytes. It is way more than how many bytes we're going to need, but you might as well. And the reason we made this is this is where we're going to store all the data from the packet that we're listening for. And alright, yeah, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to make the socket I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to go up here and make a private socket added socket S. And up here I'm just going to say S as a new socket. And we're going to make sure that it's compatible with IPv6. Most people, at least a lot of time before, outdated applications just use internetwork, but we're going to use internetwork v6 socket type .dgram. And okay, the protocol we're going to be going with is UDP. So you're probably familiar with UDP and TCP connections. If you're not, there's basically two connections here two choices that we really have to communicate with the server and the clients, which is TCP and UDP. And TCP essentially is it's a more secure version where you can communicate between the client and the server, but I'm using UDP because it is quicker, and it is less secure, but honestly, the reason I'm using it is just because I'm more comfortable with it, but we're just going to be using UDP connections for this series, and we're going to set the socket option of this socket, and right here we're just doing this to add compatibility for IPv6. So we're going to set socket option level to IPv6 and socket option name IPv6 only. And you don't have to worry about the last parameter there, just set to false. And we're going to bind it. Now this is where we actually put in which port we're going to be listening to and which IP address we're going to be listening to. But let me just do that. For the IP address, it might be volatile, it might change, because if you, for instance, running your host on a VPS, that can change, your IP address can change. So we're going to do, say IP address.ipv6 any, and this IP address is going to be yours. It's going to be whatever you put the host on, except you might not know what it is. So that's why we're just listening for any IPv6 address. And okay, so the port, when it comes to ports, you gotta be, there's ports that get used. So for example, if you use a port and a different application is using it, it's not gonna work. Because if an application is used, two applications can't use the same port. And if you use the same port as that application is already using, then it's going to throw an exception. So what you want to do, preferably, is go into Wikipedia, and you can just Google this. On Wikipedia, there's a list of common applications and which port they use, and you can just use a port that's not used by any other application, and you're going to need two ports for this. The ports I'm going to be using, 14568 and 14567. But for this, we're just going to use 14568. And that's going to be the socket, and we can go back down here to listen. And what we're going to do is say s.receive from, and s is just the socket we've made up here. And we're going to say, we're going to store, okay, so what this function does, it's going to wait until we've received a socket or data on this port from any IP address. It's going to wait till we've received data. And we're going to store that data in this right here. And that's where I'm putting that there. And and the endpoint is gonna be this. So that's where the data's from. And we're just gonna use the ref keyword here. Okay, there's one more thing we actually need to import. System.collections.generic. And this is just going to give us access to list. And basically, the only immediate benefit of using a list over an array is that you don't have to know the length. But we already know the length. So you might be confused on why we're making a list right here. And we're actually going to make it of this array. So basically, how you turn an array into a list is you make a list normally, but in the constructor here, you put the array. So this is the array. List. And the reason that I'm doing this is because of this function right here, remove all. I'm just going to write this and explain what it does. So what the remove all function does is it goes through every single byte in this list and it stores it in this here, B. And we're taking it and we're checking if it's equal to 0. And if it is equal to 0, remove it. Now, why would a byte be equal to 0? Well, as you can see here, there's going to be 65,000 bytes. And we're not going to use all of them. That's a pretty absurd amount. So it's going to end up creating a lot of blank bytes. And we'll just get rid of them. And that's if you really want to, you can see what happens. If you're curious, you can see what happens without that. But and what we're going to do just for now, we're going to write what we get. And we're going to go ahead and use this system.text import here to say encoding.ascii.get string bytes, and then we're going to convert it back to array here. And basically, the reason we need this is because when you're using packets, again, you have to send them in bytes. And obviously, bytes are like this. You can make a byte like this, or like this, but you can't make a byte like this. So what we have to do is convert bytes in this format into text using encoding.ascii.getString, and then we're just taking this list here and converting it back into array. So that should be pretty straightforward. We're going to add one more line here. Since we're actually not only going to listen for one packet, we're going to call the function again. So that it will go ahead and try to listen for another packet. Alright, so for now, we're done with the client. We're going to go back to the host, or the control panel. And I'll make a little function here for this. Send command. And I'll put in parameters the string command. Same imports. Apart from I don't think I'm going to need the collections.generic one. Socket, and in here we're going to make a socket s equals near socket, and we're going to just do the same thing we did before for the first bit here. So I'll just get through this quickly. And okay, so now what we're going to need to do is make the IP endpoint. Now right now we only have one bot, and that's going to be this one, and you're only going to be running it on your computer for now. So for now, we're only going to just for debugging purposes, we're going to make the IP address this. And what this means, it's just your computer. So we're communicating to your own computer, because whenever you put this right here, this means your own network. So we're communicating with our own network. And what is the port I used? There. And we're going to do the same thing, make another byte array data, except this time we're going to say encoding.ask get bytes. And CMD, because that's the command. And then we're just going to send it. Send the data to the IP endpoint. So maybe you connected the dots immediately here, but if you didn't, I'll show you. So I'm just going to write up here, send command, and then some command, for instance. So let's say we do this. It's going to say this CMD here is going to be some command, and we're just creating the socket and IP endpoint. And here in the data, we're getting the bytes of this command. So we're converting this into bytes, and then we're sending it over to the client. And then at the client, it gets those bytes. It removes the ones that we didn't include. And then it takes those bytes and converts them back to text, to readable text. But we're not actually going to just send some command, we're going to send console read line, so we could take user input. I'm going to go ahead and build that. And I'm going to run this. So this is the control panel. And then, that's actually kind of annoying. It's fine though. We can run both of them at the same time if you just go over here and run it like that. This dot to dot means nothing, I was just showing it right here. So I'll show you guys what we're doing here. So we're sending the command of whatever I write into here. And if this works, it's going to show up here. So let's say this is my command. And as you can see, it did show up here. And I guess this might not seem that significant right now, but if you were running this on a different computer, with it on a different network, on a different IP, it would still work. And if you were running this. So, for instance, if this was being run on your computer, and this was being run over, like, on your friend's house, on his different IP, his different computer, this connection would still work as long as you, like, change the IP right here accordingly. So, now that we've got the simple connection done, we can move on with the more important things. So I'm just going to end the tutorial right here, and I'll see you guys on episode 2, hopefully.